Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Prior to the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order had officially been at peace for close to 1,000 years. Born in the chaos and bloodshed of the Great Force schisms of the past, the Jedi Order has a surprisingly violent history paired with a legacy of martial prowess. You see, whether the original Jedi sought it or not, the power that came with being a Force user ultimately put these spiritual monks in a position where they had to choose to take up arms or not. The factions of the Jedi that decided to embrace what they saw as their responsibility to protect the weak would adopt the laser sword.
An elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
The laser sword is really not the most practical weapon for a warrior to use, and that is kind of the point. For a Jedi, killing should not be automatic. There should be a great weight applied to such a decision. If you take a look at this blade, it's completely weightless, and so it requires different senses to control it properly, senses that a Force user might be able to train and harness. You see, at the heart of a lightsaber is a kyber crystal, a force-sensitive conduit that amplifies energy that is beamed into it. It's a pretty rare and crazy property for a Djem to have. Galen Erso, the brilliant researcher behind the Death Star laser, had been attracted to the kyber crystal's ability to amplify energy. He saw this as a solution to create cheap energy for the masses. And so when a Force user uses a lightsaber, they're connecting through the Force with a kyber crystal that powers it. That's the whole point of the gathering ceremony the Jedi do on Ilum. And without this connection, it's almost impossible to properly wield a lightsaber.
Energy constantly flows through the crystal. You're not fighting with a simple blade as much as you are directing a current of power. Your thoughts, your actions, they become energy. They flow through the crystal as well and become a part of the blade.
Now, even with the Force connection, sword fighting is still sword fighting, and Jedi might have superpowers, but they themselves are not super beings. They are unable to slow down time and perceive incoming blows and blaster rounds. Instead, they depend on precognition, almost something akin to spidey senses. At the highest level of lightsaber combat, the duelist should be in a trance. There's actually very little active decision making. And so being a powerful Force user in most cases also makes you a better duelist. But here's the thing, instincts, they rely on muscle memory, and the Jedi realized from early on while lightsaber fights were too fast for them to actively respond to, they still needed to teach their muscles and their body different positions and stances that could be useful. This is where the lightsaber forms come into play. Once a beginner masters Form 1, which includes all the basic strikes, they can begin to specialize in a variety of different forms, all with their own strengths and weaknesses. And when I say a wide variety, I really do mean that. In many of the greatest duels in Star Wars history, it wasn't the skill of the individual or their connection to the Force that determined the outcome of the battle. Oftentimes, it was about the form of lightsaber combat that all the combatants chose. So today we're going to be taking a look at all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, and we're going to be talking about the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Form 1, Shii-Cho, the Way of the Sarlacc. It is the form that is taught to every Jedi learner in the Order. The point of Form 1 is teaching the striker the various zones of attack on their enemy's body and the ideal angles to approach those zones, along with how to efficiently position your blade when deflecting projectiles. Well, the Jedi were naturally tuned into the weapons and their bodies in some ways. Body dynamics is still body dynamics. There are efficient ways to move your body that people have figured out hundreds of years before you have, and it's usually a good idea to learn these positions. Interesting fact, almost every Jedi in the modern era was trained directly by Grandmaster Yoda in Form 1 technique. I guess you could say for Yoda, Form 1 was the one constant in his interaction with almost every Force user in the entire Order. And so I guess he probably used that to see how each individual is a bit different. Because this technique was created by the Jedi, it mainly focuses on disarming your opponent rather than fatal blows. Shii-Cho is commonly seen as a weak form because of this. Also, whenever one sees Form 1 being used, it's usually a novice who's very early on in their lightsaber training journey, and so their movements associated with Form 1 are usually seen as slow and clumsy. But in the hands of a real Form 1 master, someone like Kit Fisto, the lightsaber form can quickly morph from something familiar into a very unpredictable and deadly barrage of attacks. Sii-Cho is a pretty well-balanced lightsaber form, and it is particularly useful against multiple opponents on a chaotic battlefield. And that's because a lot of the movements in Sii-Cho are quite exaggerated, it turns out. You have these large sweeping cuts and slashes which can do splash damage, but it can also leave a Jedi very open and vulnerable to counterattack. My theory is that because Form 1 comes from traditional sword fighting, The Jedi kind of failed to forget that there's some major differences between an energy sword and a physical blade. For one, the force needed to cut with a lightsaber is significantly less than that of a sword. You really do need to follow through and swing with a lot of force to make a sword work. And we'll see in future combat systems designed specifically for the lightsaber movements that are designed specifically for the lightsaber, which again can cut in any direction and cut upon contact. You don't actually need to swing and follow through. You can literally just go like this and kill someone. That is the difference. And it should be mentioned that these forms are not just numbered because they're different. The numerical ascension here also depicts a history of innovation and a desire for both light side and dark side force users to come up with new techniques to dominate their enemies. Form 2, Makashi, the way of the Ysalamiri. The Ysalamiri was a very peculiar creature, adored by Grand Admiral Thrawn. You see, these little lizard creatures were hunted by a predator that used the Force to smell out its prey. As a defense mechanism, the Ysalamiri was able to create a void in the Force, a bubble of sorts. If you had enough Ysalamiri in the same place, you could create an entire area where a Jedi couldn't tap into the energy field and became powerless. The Ysalamiri allowed Grand Admiral Thrawn to finally control the Jedi. It was his kryptonite. Well, it was the Jedi's kryptonite. He used it. In Form 2, Makashi ironically was created by the Jedi to counter the newly arrived Sith, who were wielding lightsabers as well, and very quickly, the Sith would also use Form 2 against its creators. Whereas Form 1 incorporates a lot of heavy swinging motions you might see in sword fighting, Form 2 is more rooted in fencing. Now, this lightsaber I've been holding up, it's actually Count Dooku's lightsaber. I got it from a storage unit auction sale on Serrano after the Clone Wars ended. And it's a weird shape, it's curved. This is specifically designed by Count Dooku for his version of Makashi. Dooku also had a similar set of blades made for Asajj Ventress, his apprentice. Not all Makashi practitioners use this type of curved hilt. But when you have a curved hilt, what it does is, when you hold it, it allows you to basically point the end of the lightsaber in the same direction as your arm, and it turns your entire arm into a perfect thrusting vehicle. Count Dooku holds his blade in the same way a fencer holds their rapier. Now, normally a fencer would struggle against an individual using a sword. A rapier is just too thin and it offers a limited ability to move your opponent's blade out of the way. But again, because we're dealing with lightsabers, all the things we know about traditional sword fighting and fencing don't really apply anymore. And so Form 2 Makashi makes a living in between the broad strokes of Form 1 and honestly all of the other forms that use larger, bigger movements to create a defensive or offensive shell. Form 2 Makashi is extremely precise and when used correctly should allow the user to expend minimal energy and effort while carefully poking and peeling apart their enemy's defenses. It's all about misdirection, minimal effort, and looking great while doing it. Now, another thing that differentiates lightsaber fighting from sword fighting is this.
The blades will be drawn to each other.
So you know how duelists always lock lightsabers and exchange words during those moments? It's not just because Star Wars is trying to make the scene overly dramatic. I mean, they are trying to do that. But also because, as mentioned before, these streams of energy are connected to the hearts and souls of these combatants. And so when their blades meet and lock, they're actually having a discussion, a battle, if you will, in the Force, a parallel battle that is equally as important to the physical one they're having. You remember when Rey locks blades with Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens and then remembers how to use the Force? You can see the moment when Kylo Ren realizes that things have changed. Anyway, for a Makashi Force user, locking blades actually has two really important purposes. One is it can really allow you to infiltrate your opponent's mind and throw them off balance. If you take a look at Count Dooku's pre-duel shit-talking, it is at a completely different level from Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi, who generally just like exchanging one-liners and messing around. Dooku, on the other hand, just likes messing with people's heads and emotions and cutting straight to their hearts and destroying them.
Master Kenobi, you disappoint me. Yoda holds you in such high esteem.
So when two Force users lock blades, it allows the Makashi user to flood dark side thoughts and images into their opponent's mind, throwing them off balance ever so slightly, allowing the Makashi user to use the blade lock to basically control both blades and eventually disarm their opponent. Or literally their arm, in Anakin's case. Blade locking is basically lightsaber fighting's version of grappling. Form 2 Makashi will always be one of the best forms to use in a duel against one combatant, but that intense focus you have to have on that one person will leave you open to attacks from a second or third individual. Form 3, Soresu, or the way of the Mynock. Mynocs were annoying little winged beasts who oftentimes overwhelmed spacers in the most inconvenient times by sucking the energy out of their battery packs. A very apt analogy for this form, as you'll see. Form 3 was primarily created because of the invention of the blaster. It really didn't take non-Force users long to realize that they shouldn't with a Jedi at melee ranges, especially when they're holding that glowing rod of energy. And so people started taking pot shots at Jedi from far away, and they started realizing that that worked and switched straight to overwhelming amounts of suppressing blaster fire. Now, because of their ideology, the Jedi never attacked first. This might be why they're using a melee weapon that also serves as a beacon of light. They can't really sneak attack anyone. And so learning a technique to properly defend oneself from rapid blaster fire became crucial to a Jedi's survival. Form 3 Soresu is all about battlefield awareness and creating a complete defensive shell. This was achieved by very careful body positioning and sword positioning to ensure maximum defensive coverage. To an onlooker, Form 3 should look casual and calm when used against every other form. The idea here is to kind of relax and fall into a defensive rhythm where you spend minimal amounts of energy, and then you just observe your opponent, watch them get more and more tired and frustrated because they can't penetrate your defenses, and then when you see an opening, you exploit it. All throughout history, Force users have used the mundane Form 3 to overcome much more dangerous, exotic, and powerful enemies. General Obi-Wan Kenobi would use Form 3 successfully against the multi-armed General Grievous on numerous occasions. Rule of Two founder Darth Bane and his apprentice Zana would survive a deadly Jedi ambush using this technique as well. Had they lost this battle, the Sith could have been destroyed much earlier on, and Palpatine would have never rose to power. It also became apparent very quickly that Form 3 practitioners would be very useful on the grand battlefields of the Clone Wars, where situational awareness was key to survival, as was dodging blaster bolts. During the disastrous raid on Petronaki Arena, most of the Jedi strike team was destroyed, but a good percentage who made it out were Form 3 practitioners. In the hands of a skilled user, Form 3 can be impenetrable, but if there is one weakness to this form, that is a single determined attacker using Makashi, the dueling form, to throw the total defense shell out of rhythm. Form 4, Ataru, the way of the Hawkbat. Form 1 through 3 were focused mainly on body positioning and blade positioning. The Force in these forms is used as a supplementary tool that can aid the fighter's strikes and movements. Form 4 Ataru, however, is completely fueled by the Force and uses the energy field to enhance the speed and power of the user almost constantly. This usually results in acrobatic flips, twirls, and other gravity-defying stunts. To an onlooker, a Form 4 practitioner at full speed should be a blur of light. Now, in the Jedi Order, there were two Jedi that were well known for using this form, the massive Qui-Gon Jinn and the very small Grandmaster Yoda. When Yoda used Form 4, it turned him and his lightsaber, which was longer than his body almost, into a ball of light. Trying to hit him was like trying to hit a training remote almost. When Qui-Gon Jinn used Ataru, it translated into long and tiring jumps as the larger man awkwardly threw his weight around. It's not that Qui-Gon Jinn wasn't powerful or well-trained or well-connected to the Force, he really was. But like a lot of Jedi during this period of peace, Qui-Gon Jinn chose a lightsaber form that just wasn't very practical for his body type. And so when Qui-Gon Jinn attempts to use Form 4 Ataru in his duel against Darth Maul, the larger man quickly runs out of room to use his moves, and more importantly, he also runs out of energy and becomes tired. If Form 3 is all about being very patient and conservative during duel, Form 4 is the exact opposite. It's about going balls to the wall, all out, and overwhelming your enemy before you tire yourselves out. They're basically the capoeira fighter of the lightsaber combat world. It's always exciting and worthwhile watching them to fight, and that's because someone's going to get their head cut off. You just don't know who. Form 4 Ataru practitioners don't really believe in half measures at all. Form 5, Shien and Djem, also known as the Way of the Krayt Dragon. This was created by members of the Jedi Order who believed that Form 3 was way too conservative and actually extended battles longer than they needed to. And so this form is actually based off of the Form 3 defensive shell technique. That's the Shien part of Form 5, but also has an added package of power strikes which were designed to stagger the opponent and create openings. That's the Djem part of Form 5. A perfect example of Form 5 being used to perfection is that time when Princess Leia got all rebellious and ran off with the wrong crowd, so her daddy had to crash the party and murder everyone to keep her sweet little Leia pure and innocent. Notice Vader's effortless interception of incoming blaster rounds combined with his vicious and powerful lightsaber strikes. When done well, Form 5 can be a thing of beauty to watch. It should be mentioned that lightsaber combat generally does not discriminate discriminate when it comes to the physical traits of the user or even how young or old they are. But generally speaking, the best Form 5 fighters oftentimes have very large statures or are physically powerful. The added weight and strength will just make every Form 5 movement even better. For instance, one of the most famous moves in Form 5 is the Falling Avalanche, and it's made up of several two-handed overhead strikes, which are designed to break even the hardest of defenses. Anakin's apprentice Ahsoka Tano also used Form 5 despite being very small. She would actually modify the form by adopting a reverse grip Shanto in her offhand and switch in dual strikes for traditional Gemso power strikes. This unique combination of stature and skills and lightsaber grip combined with Form 5 is what made Ahsoka so difficult to fight. You simply could not train for someone like her because there was no one like her. Other than Ahsoka Tano though, generally Form 5 practitioners are known to be less mobile and less flexible, and you can use that advantage to get around them. Form 6, Niman, or the Way of the Rancor, is the lightsaber form for Jedi who don't really like training in the lightsaber. This is ideal for a lightsaber during the Golden Age of the Republic after the Ruusan Reformation, where the average Jedi Knight was more likely to find themselves at diplomatic engagements with very fancy people rather than dueling a Sith Lord. Form 6 lightsaber movements are pretty simple, very easy to learn, and that's because a lot of the power in Form 6 comes from a Force user's telekinesis abilities. See, instead of enhancing one's movement and speed like in Form 4, Form 6 Niman uses the Force as a weapon directly. The idea is to keep your opponent off balance and use your sword to exploit those openings. In this way, Niman can be highly unpredictable and very useful against powerful duelists who might not have access to the Force, like General Grievous. By the time the Clone Wars started, Niman had become one of the most popular forms in the Jedi Order, another sign that the Jedi were completely unprepared for what was about to come. At the Battle of Petronaki Arena, none of the Niman fighters, including several masters, would make it out alive. It's as if we took all of those fake gurus on the internet, put them into a combat arena with a bunch of real combat fighters, street fighters, UFC fighters, and that's basically what happened. Niman was exposed to be a fraud. Now, ultimately, Niman is a balanced lightsaber form for a balanced life. However, the life of a Jedi general on the front lines of the Galactic Civil War is far from balanced. More combat potential is needed, guys. Form 7 Juyo, Way of the Vornskir. You guys remember the Yislamari we were talking about before? Well, they developed their ability to negate the Force because of these guys, the Vornskir, vicious predators who tracked and hunted down Force-sensitive prey. They specifically liked the taste of Jedi younglings, or so I'm told. Now, in the past, when the Jedi Order was more free and perhaps more desperate because the war against the Sith weren't going well, the Jedi were allowed to dabble in a lot more advanced and some might say dark side techniques. Form 7 Juyo was always a part of that dark past. Unlike other lightsaber forms which focus mainly on movement and exploiting the body position of your enemy, Form 7 Juyo was fueled by internal strength and emotions, and the most powerful emotions for combat are fear, anger, and hatred. Users of Form 7 allowed this rage to flow through their body, which would give them the ability to pull off Form 4 style movements, but with even more potency, corruption, and anger. Naturally, Form 7 Juyo would be banned by the Jedi when it became a more peaceful and highbrow organization. Until, that is, Mace Windu came into the picture. Mace Windu was a savant with a lightsaber. He mastered every form of lightsaber combat at a very early age, and this was really due to his ironclad discipline. Windu found that unlike other Jedi, he had the ability to tap into the dark side of the Force, channel it through his body, using his damaging powers without actually falling to the dark side. This technique would actually allow a Jedi to use the powerful and chaotic strikes of Juyo, but also maintain that clarity of mind that the Jedi really required of its fighters. Now, I've always theorized that Mace Windu is just like the Hulk, as in he's like always angry and furious. But anyway, Mace Windu would call this new form of Vaapad. Now, one of the interesting side effects of Vaapad was that Mace Windu was able to not only channel his own anger and not be affected by it, he's also able to redirect the dark side energy that Sith duelists used against him, especially when tapping into Form 7 Juyo. And so, when fighting Palpatine, the stronger and harder the Sith Lord fought, the more powerful Mace Windu became when he reflected all that energy back at him. And so, Form 7's biggest weakness is actually Form 7, and also Form 7 in a lot of ways is the most powerful lightsaber form, but also the most dangerous lightsaber form, especially for a Jedi. So there you have it, guys. That is the complete a guide to every lightsaber form and which forms you should use in which scenarios. Ideally, you should just learn all of these so that you can switch back and forth like a video game. Because life is like a video game. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.